Working to make sure everyone has a place to call home. A key is knowing how big the problem of homelessness is. Ahead on Face the State, an annual count found homelessness is still on the rise in Franklin County. Community Shelter Board President and CEO Shannon Isom joins me to talk about the findings, the trends, and the possible solutions. Also, Governor Mike DeWine called for a special session of the General Assembly to make sure President Biden is on the November ballot here in Ohio. Hear why he did it and what to expect this week. Plus, fixing Ohio's child care crisis could help families with the high cost of care and help businesses hold on to talented employees. Two new bills in the State House pipeline look to share the cost three ways. Thanks for joining us for Face the State. I'm Doug Petcash. Central Ohio is experiencing all kinds of growth these days. New, huge businesses are coming in. More people are moving in. Roads are being built. All signs of progress. But not all growth is positive, as a recent report shows us. The number of people experiencing homelessness in Columbus and Franklin County jumped again this year. In January, more than 200 volunteers fanned out across the city and county to count the number of men, women, children, and families who don't have a permanent place to call home. They tallied the numbers of those staying in shelters and those living on the streets. Community Shelter Board did its 2024 point-in-time count in partnership with Continuum of Care. They released their report at the end of April. And here's what they found. The number of people experiencing homelessness jumped nearly 2% from 2023 to 2024. The number climbed from 2,337 individuals to 2,380. The Community Shelter Board says that is an all-time high. Of those, 514 were living outside. 1,866 people were counted living in shelters or transitional housing. You can see the increases there on your screen. This is on top of a 22% increase in the number of homeless counted from 2022 to 2023. Joining me now to talk about the count, the reasons for the uptick, and what's being done about it is Community Shelter Board President and CEO Shannon Isom. Shannon, welcome to Face the State.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Well, let's set the base first. Yes. What is Community Shelter Board? What does it do?
Community Shelter Board is a 38-year-old legacy here, very much centered on Franklin County, the Columbus region. And it was made and produced to have everyday, moment-by-moment thinking on homelessness. And so there's three main things that we do. The first being that we ready the system around homelessness. We ensure that we have partners, that we have resources that are readied for things like this, a large increase. The second is that we work with federal and state as well as local partners to ensure that we have financial resources for those partners. And then thirdly, we ensure that we are prospectively thinking about what's next in homelessness.
Now, I understand that you don't run shelters, but that you work with 8 or 9 or so in this area. What do you do in partnership with them?
The first thing that we do more than anything is to ensure that we're working with the Continuum of Care, our local governing body, to ensure that we have compliance with HUD, the federal entity that is giving us funding, making sure that we are moving through the markers of what our country has committed to for housing. But the most important thing that we do is to ensure funding for those partners. And we look at that contract every year. Those partners will come back to us and say, this is what it feels like to operationalize for those goals. And so it does become a mutual reciprocal relationship. And then we can go back to the county, we can go back to our federal stakeholders and say, we need more money for this, or have we thought about this? This is a continued gap. We are at a season right now that across this country, though, we are seeing increasing levels of homelessness. So Franklin County and Columbus is not alone in this as the federal HUD system tries to figure this out.
How do you characterize the growth in homelessness that this year's point-in-time count found?
Yeah. I'd characterize it as first that we're all concerned, and I would tell you that probably many of your listeners in our constituency is thinking about it first, top of mind. And at this point, I would also say that this is a homeless problem is something that every industry is talking about it. Whether I can spend my week now speaking to the superintendent all the way to business leaders, as well as any of our public health officials talking about homelessness. So we know that this is affecting everything. I would characterize this as a season that we are looking at as of last year, which is the highest increase that we've ever seen in homelessness, the 22%, that now we're, although it looks like it's nominal, 1.8%, it is still on top of the highest increase we've ever seen. So we're still at a high increasing rate of homelessness. And I think it's concerning for all of us.
We'll get to some of the reasons for that in a minute, but who are the people that you're seeing is experiencing homelessness? Is there a trend in the demographics? Who are these folks?
Yeah, Doug, we get that a lot, like who's there? And we definitely have an idea of who we believe is homelessness, but I would tell you that based on the numbers that we're seeing and what our partners are telling us, dispel all of those ideas, that archetype of homelessness. We see everyone. We see youth in homeless conditions. We see moms with now with increasing levels of children coming into our shelters. We are seeing single men. We are seeing single moms. We are, you name it, we see it. What is the most concerning, though, and we're seeing these high levels of increases around elderly. You would not think that, and yet they are there. We're seeing higher levels of homelessness with people that are working. I'll tell you that one of the things that we are looking at that has changed in this last year is that less poverty is in our homelessness, more people that are working with jobs coming in with income are within our shelters.
So then what is causing that then? Older folks, perhaps fixed incomes, rising rents?
Exactly. Not only do we have rising rents, which we know is a marker across this entire country, that contributes heavily to homelessness, but there's a second factor. And when you have these two factors together, your community is dealing with high rates of homelessness. And that second factor is low vacancy rates. When we have 4% and under is what the industry says, when you have 4% and under vacancy rates, then you are contributing probably to homelessness. That means you've run out of housing. We're at 3.8%.
And you're seeing this chronic homelessness, right?
Yeah.
What's that defined as?
Yeah, we're seeing homelessness with chronic homelessness, meaning that there are people that have moved through our systems more than 3+ times. Our community members are experiencing homelessness, whether that is on the land or within our shelters, over and over and over again. And what we have as resources is not aligning them to break that trend. And so, yeah, we're seeing a high increase of that, over 40%.
So I also understand the City of Columbus recently announced a pretty historic amount of funding for Community Shelter Board, $9.4 million.
Yes.
I believe they say it nearly tripled their usual annual investment in the Community Shelter Board. How critical is that funding, and then how will you use it?
Yeah, the City of Columbus has been an exceptional partner, and as I have come in, have allowed me to really challenge our status quo. And I think it's important for us to say and to think, and Community Shelter Board to look prospectively to say, gosh, City of Columbus and others that are making these really difficult decisions to say, gosh, we can still get in front of this, which I think we can. Well, they trusted that, and they're using and gave us funds to certainly operate our emergency shelters. We have partners that are 365 days out of the year, even coming up on Memorial Day, where we'll see hot temperatures, working very hard to ensure that our community members that are experiencing homelessness will have the right resources. But the city did even beyond that. I had an ask that we want those people on the front line that are making $12 and $14 an hour to have a better wage, a better benefit, and ask the city to come up with a way to benefit that at $21 an hour.
How would they do that?
They did that. They brought in some of those dollars. So we have 5 emergency shelters that are able to have benefit of getting extra dollars for those frontline workers. We still need sustained dollars for them, and that's something we're still working on with that. But the City of Columbus has been working with us diligently.
Are you talking about it's kind of like a subsidy for their wages, that money is going directly to those
The
people?
money is going straight pass through to those frontline workers. That's correct.
I also understand, is there an effort to perhaps free up more like hotel space to take in families and individuals? Is that one of the ideas?
Yeah, the city itself, as well as this region, is moving through several economic markers that are really positive. But what we're also looking at in this very Midwest city, in this very Midwest state, is we have crumbling infrastructure. We have some infrastructure, some capital needs that need to be invested to some of those capital buildings. And that includes hotels and motels, but it also includes our infrastructure of housing and apartments that are older. Mm-hmm. We have some apartments that need some strong attention. We have seen it here. I'm sure that you all have covered it. We have 2 or 3 instances within Franklin County where we've had deteriorating apartments that has made people move very quickly into homelessness, or at least a destabilized state of housing. I think we're going to continue to see that. The answer to that, we believe, Community Shelter Board, and we're putting forward to anyone who listens, is that we can take some of our underutilized buildings, hotels, motels. We have plenty of them that aren't either being used or being underutilized. And how do we repurpose them to make sure that they are readied so that people don't have to move into shelter but can move into single non-congregate spaces? And as we're seeing those that are moving through quick destabilization of housing, maybe even unhoused, that we will have ready space for them to move into.
So they're not on the streets.
That's right.
Well, we only have a little bit of time left. I guess, what is the focus, today moving into this summer?
Yeah, the focus today, and always as we move into the summer, will always be temperature. Whether it's the winter or whether it's the summer, we're always thinking about temperature changes, and especially those people that are living on the land. We want to make sure that people have ready spaces. We want to make sure that we have spaces that are cooling center. And the City of Columbus has a long list on their website. They've always offered those things, and we are continuing to make sure that with any of our partners that we know exactly where to go with that. Secondly, we need to make sure that we're gearing up, as we always should be, for the winter. So how do we make sure that there's ready spaces around hotels and motels, but also working with our business community to ensure that there's also outreach services, that if people are in distress or in need, the businesses know where to call and that we know how to get people help.
And how can people get more information?
Any way of going on our website, we can always have that. Give us a call. We also have really ready resources to answer the phone and to ensure that they have right places to go. And then obviously the City of Columbus has a website that always has cooling centers on it as well.
Just look up Community Shelter Board.
That's right.
Shannon, thank you so much for your time and for laying out what the situation is right now according to the count and what you're doing about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well, still ahead on Face the State, the push to add a different way to execute Ohio's death row inmates, why the state's top law enforcement officer is throwing his weight behind nitrogen gas. But first, the Biden campaign and state Democratic leaders promise the president will be on Ohio's November ballot. But the Republican-controlled legislature said there was no will for a legislative fix. Now the governor has called for action. We have the latest.
This is an absurd situation.
Ohio Governor Mike DeWine did not mince words Thursday evening when he called for a special legislative session to make sure President Biden is on the November ballot here in Ohio. That special legislative session will be this coming Tuesday and Wednesday, and the governor says something better get done. 10 TV's Yolanda Harris has the story.
It's important that when they go to vote for president, that Joe Biden be on the ballot as well as Donald Trump.
Governor DeWine's special session will tackle 2 key issues: getting President Biden on the ballot and prohibit campaign spending by foreign nationals. DeWine says he had no choice but to call a special session now.
I've waited, I've been patient, and my patience has run out.
In order to get President Biden on the ballot, the state legislature would have to change its certification deadline and move it after the Democratic National Convention. Right now, Ohio's certification deadline is August 7th, and the convention is not until August 19th through the 22nd.
We are literally up against the wall here. That if we would go beyond Wednesday of next week, then when you do the math, you have some very, very serious problems.
In a statement, House Speaker Jason Stephens said lawmakers have been pushing for weeks to find a solution, but the will was not there in the Republican caucus. And a spokesperson for the Ohio Senate said it agrees with the governor. The question is, will the votes be there?
There's a very simple solution to this problem, and we should take this action. And I believe the legislature will next week.
So what allows the governor to call a special session under these circumstances? It's called Article 3, Section 8 of the Ohio Constitution. It grants the governor the power to convene the General Assembly on extraordinary occasions. The last time this happened was 20 years ago when Governor Bob Taft called a special session on campaign finance reform. We'll cover this special session and let you know what happens. The Biden campaign released a statement about the situation in the legislature before DeWine's news conference. It said, Joe Biden will be on the ballot in all 50 states, and we are assessing next steps accordingly. Election after election, states across the country have acted in line with the bipartisan consensus and taken the necessary steps to ensure the presidential nominees from both parties will be on the ballot. And this election is no different. Alabama, with full Republican support, and Washington State are already taking action to ensure that voters can exercise their right to vote for the candidate of their choice in November. House Bill 68, the transgender health care and women's sports bill, has garnered passionate debate on both sides. It's controversial and now is in the courts. Last week, the Supreme Court of Ohio rejected a request by the state to narrow a temporary restraining order, a TRO, which blocks the state from enforcing the measure. The law bans gender-affirming medical care for transgender youth and prohibits transgender athletes from playing women's and girls' school sports. The law was supposed to go into effect on April 24th until a lawsuit was filed against it. Now, a hearing on the injunction is scheduled to start July 15th. A spokesperson for the Ohio Attorney General's office gave a statement saying, quote, 4 Ohio Supreme Court justices share our concern as to whether one judge in a single county should be able to speak for the entire state and overrule the legislature, but they question whether this is the right case for taking up the issue. The ACLU, who filed the lawsuit, called the state's request egregious and says the scope of the temporary restraining order is necessary and appropriate to prevent the constitutional violations and other irreparable harm that would immediately occur if HB 68 were permitted to take effect. Again, a hearing is scheduled for mid-July. The death penalty took center stage in a hearing at the State House. Lawmakers heard a bill that would add nitrogen hypoxia as an alternative method of execution for death row inmates. Supporters of the bill had the chance to testify. Ohio hasn't carried out the death penalty since 2018. Governor Mike DeWine declared an unofficial moratorium on executions because the state can't get the necessary drugs for lethal injection. The bill would give those sentenced to death the option to choose between lethal injection or nitrogen hypoxia. But nitrogen hypoxia would have to be used if lethal injection drugs are not available. Alabama used the method earlier this year. Attorney General Dave Yost testified in favor of the bill. He says the death penalty is appropriate for the worst of the worst and says the state should use nitrogen hypoxia.
This seems to be available, relatively straightforward, and we don't have supply problems. Nitrogen is in the air around you. You breathe it every moment of the day. It's easy to extract, it's easy to buy. We don't have to rely on the whims of a pharmaceutical company.
I am opposed to the death penalty and certainly opposed to that piece of legislation that I think is barbaric, to say the least. And, we'll see where that discussion goes.
The bill has a ways to go. This was just the second hearing on it. Opponents will likely get the chance to testify at a future hearing. Ohio lawmakers say the state is in a child care crisis and the time to act is now. They say the average cost for child care for one child is between $8,500 and $11,500 per year. 2 lawmakers introduced companion bills they say will help working families, businesses, and child care providers. Under their bills in the House and Senate, the cost would be split 3 ways. The families needing child care, their employer, and the state would each pay a third. A child care provider I talked to likes what she's hearing.
Everybody okay?
Misty Norman has owned and operated Heavenly Kids Center for Learning in Columbus for 17 years. She loves it.
Just seeing the kids develop and grow and go to that next level.
But she says it's been a struggle the last few years. She lost employees and clients during the COVID pandemic. And now keeping workers is still a challenge. Fewer teachers means fewer kids she can take.
Everything was increasing except for the funds that we were receiving in order to pay our teachers. You know, we also have to carry the burden of families not qualifying for certain services, still needing child care, and our hands are tied.
State Senator Michelle Reynolds and Representative Mark Johnson introduced companion bills they call the Child Care Cred Act.
There we go. Gotcha.
It aims to make child care more affordable and accessible by using a cost-sharing model. The families, their employer, and the state would each pay a third of the cost. Employers can opt in. It's not mandatory. The state would put up $10 million to get the program rolling.
Current state support for child care is inadequate, leaving many families who don't qualify for publicly funded programs like Title 20 struggling to afford child care. Right now, Ohio offers child care assistance to those earning up to 130% of the federal poverty level, but many working families don't qualify for that. This program could help them. Lawmakers say turning around the child care crisis will also help with workforce shortages. They say employers are struggling to attract or keep employees who leave the workforce because of the high cost of child care. The Ohio Chamber of Commerce supports the bill.
60% of parents cite the lack of child care as their reason for leaving the workforce.
Misty Norman says child care providers have been fighting for years to get leaders to understand their struggle.
I'm glad it's finally happening, but we're exhausted. So I'm hoping that these, bills do pass that can give us some relief and the families.
Lawmakers are focusing on this issue. 8 bills related to child care have now been introduced in the last couple weeks. Still ahead on Face the State, a plan to nearly double the state's minimum wage isn't sitting well with some restaurant workers. Why they say they could actually lose money if the minimum wage goes up. Some restaurant workers are pushing back against a proposal to raise the minimum wage in Ohio nearly 45%. 10 TV's Angela Ann explains why they say it won't serve them well.
Would change my life. This would be terrible.
Lindsay Odell joined other bartenders, servers, and restaurant owners Tuesday for a unified message. Don't mess with the current tipping system.
Keep it the way it is. 93% of people who are in the business are saying that emphatically.
John Barker is president and CEO of the Ohio Restaurant and Hospitality Alliance. He says most of the 1,000 tipped workers surveyed fear the $15 minimum wage will mean fewer tips and ultimately less income.
Right now in the state of Ohio, just based on a brand new survey that we're announcing today, servers are averaging $27 an hour in what they get paid by their restaurant or their bar, plus they get to keep their tips. They do not want to go back to that, and that's the purpose of the survey that we released today, to let people know that.
Restaurant owners say the proposed ballot issue, if passed in November, will hurt an industry that is still struggling to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic.
The independent restaurants that I work with, and I do travel around telling independents, get involved and know what's happening and know that the 5% margin that you have for profit is going to be gone because it's going to go toward payroll from an outside group that wants to change a system that people in Ohio and servers in Ohio are perfectly happy with.
But the group pushing to boost pay has said some tipped workers are leading the minimum wage campaign to put the issue before voters. No matter how you flip it, this issue will likely sizzle the closer we get to November. For 10 TV News, I'm Angela Ann.
To get this initiative on the November ballot, Raise the Wage Ohio has to submit enough signatures by July 3rd. That's 125 days before the general election. Thank you for joining me this week for Face the State. I'm Doug Petcash. I'll see you next Sunday at 11:30. Have a great Memorial Day.